So we'll get out and we'll look at roses, wind up in the rose garden, assuming the weather holds out for us. But before we get going, a little bit about roses. Roses really grow all the way around the northern hemisphere. We have native roses to the U.S., Europe, into Asia, quite a few of them in Asia, and they've been grown. The first recorded instance of roses is back in about 2300 BCE in Sumeria. The king of Sumeria brought in figs and roses and whatnot. Now there's no drawings or anything, so we're not sure if they're really roses or if that was just generic for flowers. But then Theophrastus in 300 BC talked about roses, so they were being grown at that time, and all through most of the ancient period up until the Middle Ages, the 1700s, they were mostly grown as medicinal plants. They made oils from flowers and hips and leaves and roots and stems and kind of all kinds of different things, good for what ails you. And they didn't really start being grown as ornamentals until the 1700s, maybe a little bit earlier, but really became popular in the 1780s with Josephine Bonaparte. She's one who really made them a fashionable plant. She planted quite a lot of them.
So were they supposed to be good for specific ailments, or just kind of like a lot of things?
Yeah, I don't know what exactly, but they were used medicinally. And there was so you break down roses into a lot of different classifications, and depending on your classification, you can have 20, 30 different ways of classifying them. But kind of some of the traditional ways, you have the species roses, the wild species roses. You have the go to the old garden roses, which are the damask and the albas and centifolias and some of those type of roses. Those are the really old ones, which I always find funny because those are old, and some people who deal with roses, the real hardcore, if you were to breed two of those old roses together, those old garden roses, they would say what you got is not an old garden rose, it's a new rose. Whereas other people would say, well, anything bred after like 1837, the hardcore folks say that's not an old rose anymore. And then you have the hybrid teas, which were tea-scented roses, and those were grown. They had kind of long stalks, single large flowers, and really more for cutting roses. The floribundas, which have more flowers per head. There's the grandifloras, which are in between, which are really kind of not a very good designation, because some look more like hybrid teas, some look more like floribundas. But I think it's more of a marketing thing, because hybrid teas have a little bit of a bad name, so they put in grandifloras as a name. Then you have the David Austin rose, or sometimes called English roses. Those are roses that are bred to look like the old roses, have the same kind of flowers as those, but in kind of more modern colors, brighter colors, more reblooming, supposedly a little more pest resistant. There's some are better than others for that. The shrub roses, which are the ones that are kind of more landscape use as opposed to what we typically think of roses. And then now there's some ground cover roses, and of course climbers, and you can put in a bunch of other designations, miniatures, that sort of thing. So we'll go ahead and get on to talk about the first rose.
Tour.
Okay, word about rose names. Almost all roses, bred roses, have a kind of a nonsense name and then a trade name. So I will be using the trade names really more than the nonsense names. This one is the true cultivar name is Spro Thrive, but this is called the Thrive Rose. So you know, kind of get that sense. It is a shrub rose. Now, all roses except for the climbers are shrubs, but that designation implies that you treat it more like you would a normal shrub in your garden. You don't have to cut it back at a certain time. You don't have to cut it back to 12 to 18 inches like you do with hybrid teas. You let it grow with more stems and form more of a shrub. Shrub roses also typically have smaller flowers and lots of them, more like a floribunda. But so yeah, some of these designations kind of straddle the fence. Now, all roses are odd, have an odd leaf. Most of them are pinnate. There are some single leaf ones. Most will have 3, 5, 7, 9 or more leaflets per leaf. They also typically have real noticeable stipules on the base of the leaf. That's a distinguishing feature if you need that for a rose, if you're looking at them in the wild. They have thorns or prickles on the stems, and the wild roses have single petals with that central mass of stamens. Now, most of what we've bred are doubled and doubled and doubled and doubled, but you can still see it on here. These are just semi-double. Roses, the modern types of roses will rebloom throughout the season. They're remontant, so you get the best flowering in the spring, and then in the fall, when it's really hot, they kind of peter out over the summer, but they'll throw out some flowers here and there. A lot of people will deadhead their roses to keep them flowering longer and stronger, and they certainly can do that. It's a lot easier on a hybrid tea or a grandiflora where you only have a few large flowers. With something like this, it'd be pretty difficult to come in here and really deadhead this. Typically, if I were going to deadhead it, I would wait until most of this had passed, and then come through and kind of cut it off back here and take off this whole thing. Keep the plant a little bit more in size and clean it up that way. If you don't deadhead it, you can get some really nice rose hips. They'll turn orange or red on a lot of plants. Not all of the modern roses form hips. Some of them are so doubled they don't have really good reproductive organs in there, so they don't make fruit very well, which helps them flower more, but you don't get that other season of bloom, or color that you can get with nice hips. Hips are very strong, high in vitamin C, so if you want to eat them, you can. Mention diseases while we're here looking at the first one. You can see a little bit of some things on there. Roses are notorious for diseases, insect problems. You get lots of, you get powdery mildew, black spot, aphids, Japanese beetles. Lots of things can attack roses. Which is one reason to not grow them all in one place in a rose garden. That's kind of the worst thing you could do for a pest-prone plant is put them all together. Much better, you have many fewer problems if you put them out somewhere separated from other roses. But if you must put them all together, you'll just have to be vigilant for that. There are a lot of chemicals you can use. We try not to use many chemicals here, so we really look for the ones that are going to be more disease resistant, more disease tolerant. One of the big diseases going around is rose rosette, which is really doing a number on roses. It's been in the country since the 60s, but it's only become a real problem in recent years. Here in Raleigh, it's a real nasty problem, and what you'll get is kind of this contorted, unusual growth, almost like a witch's broom, where you get a lot of growth coming out. It'll be disfigured and red, very distinctive. It looks like pesticide, herbicide damage, but it's not. It's growing in the plant. It's a disease that's moved by a mite, a really tiny mite that is wind dispersed. So if you see that on your plant, the old recommendation, if you saw it was out here, this new growth was coming out, and it was real distinct, you cut it way back, cut it back here, get rid of that, and you'd be okay. It has gotten to be such a big problem that your best bet is to just get rid of the whole plant. Ideally, bag it up out in the garden, cut it off so you're not waving around and moving those mites all over the place. Dig out the roots, get rid of the whole thing, And then you can go back in and plant, you know, a week later you can plant a rose back there and it's no problem. The disease does not last long outside the plant. 3 days really is what it lasts. But use a week to be safe. Questions or thoughts?
Somebody told me that these encore roses, that you shouldn't have them in your yard with other roses because they carry a disease that will kill your other roses. Are they bad guys in the rose kingdom or something?
I don't know encore roses. I know encore azaleas.
Okay, these are the
knockouts.
Knockouts.
That's part of the reason that rose rosette was so bad. There was a period where a lot of the knockout roses were just put out all over the place with rose rosette. That's the disease they're talking about. That's not an issue anymore if you buy knockout roses. You're not gonna, and if you're getting them from a good grower, they're not gonna have rose rosette. But rose rosette is all over the place. There are two issues with knockout roses. Some came from the nurseries like that. The other issue is they've been so widely planted, so many places, that it's a spot where that those mites, as they're being blown by the wind, they can come in and inoculate these knockout roses and then move down the block and down the block and down the block. When you didn't have so many people growing them, so many businesses with big masses of them, it wasn't quite as big an issue. But the disease has actually been on, kind of been hanging around on the wild, the escaped Cherokee roses that we have, the multifloras roses that are growing kind of invasively all over the country.
Because, so it's their prevalence. It's not inherent to the knockout roses.
And it's not even that it's more prevalent in the knockouts. It's just that's where it was noticed. Really. Other questions?
You just mentioned that Cherokee escape rose. Is that pink climber kind of like rose? I've just seen some pink roses growing in edge of woods around here, and I've never known what
white
that
or
is.
pink, kind of climbing rose, scrambling. Yeah, it's funny because the state flower for one or two of the states on the East Coast, but it's not native.
Well, and you mentioned something about roses in the northern hemisphere. I'm assuming that they also have them in the southern hemisphere in temperate climates.
Not native.
Oh, okay.
They can grow roses in the southern hemisphere, but yeah, they're mostly all, maybe all. I'd have to go back and look, but northern hemisphere, naturally, that's where they grow. This is Rosa Nearly Wild, another shrub rose. Very similar kind of to the other one in terms of growth. It's a really easy plant. I've been growing this for a couple decades, and really disease resistant, very tough. Flowers heavily with these big clusters of single pink flowers. It is similar to the wild roses in that it does tend to flower very heavily in spring and not a whole lot after that. But if you deadhead it, it will keep flowering some. And you can see, new growth coming out, and it's getting ready to flower even though most of it has passed. Keeps a good size, easy to keep trimmed back. It's pretty spiny, so you can plant it under your daughter's window so she doesn't sneak out at night. But just a really one of my favorite low care, easy roses. And it stays pretty small. Some of the roses can get huge. This Nearly Wild is one that tends to stay within bounds. Now over time it can get 5 or 6 feet tall, but really easy to keep trimmed back.
The thorn, prickles, spines, are roses in general thought can you use one of those terms for all of them, or it just depends because some of them they're bigger than others?
They're not spines. What I always learned is that a spine is a modified stem. A thorn is a modified leaf. So, and where you get the distinction is technically every thorn on a rose, if you cut back to that thorn, it should have dormant buds there that could come out. Now, in a lot of roses, you get, and you'll see it here if you look closely, you'll see this whole stem is kind of prickly, and those are usually called prickles, and that's not a modified leaf. That's the stem is modified. So roses can have prickles or thorns.
And it's kind of stuck to where nobody can
And
both.
thorns. They can have both. Yeah. And in fact, this has some thorns farther down in amongst the prickles. But they're often used interchangeably, all of them.
Unless you're in a plant ID class.
Right.
And this is the second one I've seen. Is that kind of a new thing? Is that for this tour, the member of the rose family?
No, we have a theme for the year, Stop and Smell the Roses, and so we just designated some of the things that are in the rose family. All right.
I have a non-rose question while I'm thinking of it. I saw what looked to me like amaryllis near the fence, under the trees. I think of like amaryllis around here as being a house plant.
Oh, a lot of the amaryllis are hardy out here.
So
yeah.
though y'all didn't just sneak out and go out there and plant them last year, they're
it's
hardy.
been here since before I got here. It's been here for
Okay.
8 years.
And shade, they like shade.
No, they'll flower better in full sun. They'll grow in some
Okay,
shade, but they really do better in full sun.
Hmm.
Okay. Our next one is Tahitian Treasure. This is I forget, do they call it a grandiflora? I looked it up. Because see, these designations sometimes don't mean a whole lot. Yeah, they call this a grandiflora because the flowers are fairly large. But typically a grandiflora, you would have fewer flowers per stalk. This has quite a few flowers per stalk. This was bred by the same person who did the knockouts, Bill Radler, and he has been putting out some of the best roses ever. This has been by far my favorite in recent years that we've grown. We got it as a trial plant. It didn't have a name on it. We planted it out, and it has just flowered its head off. Flowers over a really, really long season. Foliage stays cleaner than any other rose that we're growing, and it actually held onto its leaves through most of the winter. They turned a really nice dark burgundy. A beautiful, beautiful plant in just all aspects. I think it's really outstanding. Now, if you were to go in and deadhead it, you'd keep flowers looking nicer, but that's a whole lot of work to do that. Done a little bit of deadheading, I think, or at least taking some flowers for bringing inside. But just a tough plant. Now, like I said, this is a grandiflora. You could look at this and say it's closer to a floribunda in my mind than it is to a hybrid tea. There's some grandifloras that are closer to hybrid tea than floribunda. Again, I think it's a meaningless really designation. And this one is tough enough to be considered a shrub rose, except for the way it grows at the base. That more vertical is more typical of floribunda or a hybrid tea than the shrub roses, which tend to go out more. Well, no, a shrub rose is different than a floribunda, technically.
Can't have, okay.
But these are actually considered ground cover roses, which is one of the newer kind of designations. Now, I would look at this and say that's a miniature rose. That's a large size on the large side of a miniature rose. This is apricot drift. We've grown several of the drift roses. Some are incredibly vigorous and spread quite a bit, really do form ground covers. This has been more of a rounded plant, although we have cut it back a little bit to keep it in bounds, which has helped it go up. You can see it gets just big heads of small, real double flowers. You see lots of new flowers coming on there. You can see all the spent flowers on it, and a lot of new stuff coming on, so this is a really nice long blooming one. With the drifts, we've had some mixed luck. Some have been very good, some have not been so good. Some have been kind of open and sprawly. In general, roses as ground covers is a terrible idea in my mind. I've dealt with that before. The Rosa wichuriana is kind of the classic ground cover species rose. Little white flowers, real pretty, but they're kind of open. They're not real dense, which means light can get through, which means seed can germinate. And if you have to get in and you have a big mass of these planted as a ground cover, you really want to get in there and weed your roses, stick your hands down in there and pull up. No. So I tend to steer clear of them being used actually as ground covers, but nice as small plants, small spreading plants. Okay, well, first
The Rose
the
Garden.
Rose Garden. This is the new A.E. Finley Foundation Rose Garden, the Finley-Nottingham Rose Garden. Thanks to the A.E. Finley Foundation for supporting it. Just planted, actually this week, we just put in the final roses that we have on hand. There's still some room for a few more roses, but we've got most of them in. Now, like I said, roses around here, you tend to get a lot of flowers in the spring, a lot of flowers in the fall, not a whole lot during the summer. They can look pretty ragged during the summer. So we've really interplanted with a lot of herbaceous perennials, some other shrubs, to give some color. When you come out and this is a little more filled in full flower, what you'll see is the outside perimeter is mostly all pastels, and then the inside loop is the really more intense, saturated reds and pinks and golds and that sort of thing, whereas we're getting softer on the outside.
Will there be some Lady Banks roses?
We're still debating Lady Banks. There is, I have heard rumors of a reblooming Lady Banks rose. I have not yet set my eyes on it or heard anything definitive, but I've heard about that. Lady Banks is one of my favorite plants. Beautiful fragrance, vigorous, gorgeous when in flower. Unfortunately, it flowers once, and that's it. And it is such a vigorous plant; it can kind of take over. So we don't have any planted now. Doesn't mean we won't. We're still kind of debating. The double white flower form of Lady Banks is a little bit more restrained in growth, so that makes it a little bit easier than the yellow. But yeah, I mean the real unfortunate part is just the short bloom period. Spectacular when it's there, but relatively short. So I mentioned David Austin roses. This is a David Austin. You can see it's got that old-fashioned flower. The more modern roses are higher in the center as they go out. You know, if you think of the rose you get at Valentine's Day, how that's shaped. The older roses tend to be flatter in the center, not have that peak. This is a light-colored one. This is one called Crocus. But a lot of the David Austin roses have really rich, saturated colors and reblooming, and that's really what kind of separates them. They look like the old roses, but act more like the more modern.
Is that a
roses.
person who's still alive?
David Austin, I don't know if he's still alive or not. I think he released his first roses in the 1960s, maybe as early as 1960, and really was very popular in England, and some people call them England roses. There is a David Austin U.S. There's a whole arm of the company here in Texas, and they've always been very generous. Every garden I've worked at, they're really good people to work with and deal with, and they donated the David Austin roses that are in here. But yeah, I'm not sure if.
So it's a company at this point.
Yeah, my guess is David Austin is not still alive. I would think he was older when he first started releasing them, but I'm not entirely sure about that. Also want to point out this rose back here. This is one of the ones that's closer to a species rose, Rosa chinensis mutabilis. Mutabilis means it changes. It opens up. It's almost a yellow apricot-y color, and then as it ages, it gets darker and darker and darker, and then it'll fade lighter again, lighter pink. Really, this one doesn't have a whole lot of variation in it. But if you come out in the morning when they're just opened up, you'll get really this kind of kaleidoscope of colors on there. They're very tough plants. They can get large. You can cut them back, but they can get pretty large. But they're absolutely spectacular in flower, and butterflies love them. So I've been talking about grandifloras and floribundas and hybrid teas. This is a hybrid tea. It's your traditional hybrid tea. It's going to be a very upright plant. These are young, but what traditionally you've gone for in a hybrid tea are large flowers, one to a stem, long stems so they can be cut and brought indoors. That's what a hybrid tea has always traditionally been for, is to cut and bring inside. Which is why they often don't make great garden plants because they're not being grown as a whole plant. They're being grown for individual flowers. This is Marilyn Monroe, a fairly old one. That's a very good plant. You get these kind of, opens up, I don't know what kind of color you call that, almost peach color, and then go to champagne, off-white kind of color. Very easy. You can see, since these are young plants, you can kind of see the base. And what you want in your hybrid teas and your grandifloras is to have 3 to 5 really strong canes at the base, the thickness of your thumb or larger. So when you have something like this at the base, you want to get rid of that. That's no good. You're going to get little dinky flowers. It's going to be a little dinky plant. It's not going to be good. What you want is as openly spaced as possible, 3 to 5 stems. And so in the winter, when you cut them back, you get rid of some of the small stuff and try and get that nice. So speaking of that, care of roses, let's start in the winter. When they're dormant, you want to cut them back hard. 12, 8 even to 14 inches, 18 inches tall. Just cut it all back. If you have little scrawny stuff at the base, cut that out. Even if you have a bunch of big strong stems, you want to usually reduce the number to maybe 5. If you're not getting any new canes breaking at the base ever, and you don't have good canes at the base, you can add gypsum salts or magnesium and some other source to encourage that. And during the winter, rake away all of the mulch. Get rid of the mulch. You have a lot of fungal problems with roses, so if you get rid of the mulch, you get less of the overwintering fungi out there. Get rid of it all. Put down fresh mulch, good fresh mulch on there. It's one reason why in rose gardens I often use pine straw, because pine straw is easy to remove, easy to put back down, and so that can be helpful in doing it. But at any rate, you want to get rid of what you have there, unless you want to do a lot of spraying. If you're going to be somebody who sprays, it's really 7 to 10 days. You spray with your fungicides, your pesticides. We try not to spray at all. Sometimes we'll use a systemic product that we'll put down as a liquid in the early season. It'll be drawn up by the plant, and that's really all we do all season. We're trying to get away from even that here. So the plants that are a big problem, we're going to get rid of. And we'll put in new plants and try things and try and find the best plants for the area. Because there really isn't good information, because most of the rose information comes from people who are willing to spray for beautiful roses. And they say this is a great rose for this area, and they mean it grows well and it flowers well, but it may be terrible with diseases unless you're spraying every 7 to 10 days. So we really want to figure that out and get the best roses for the area. Fertilizer, good to fertilize them a few times during the year. They do use a lot of energy. They do a lot of flowering. You can deadhead them to keep them flowering. If they get, if they're getting a lot of black spot, or they've gotten a lot of Japanese beetle damage and you don't want to spray, they're not flowering much during the summer. So go ahead and cut them back pretty hard, not down to 12 inches, but you can cut them down to 30 inches or so. Cut them down to this height or a little taller. Get rid of a lot of that foliage and let it reflush and reflower for the fall. So I mentioned a little bit about climbing roses. This is Don Juan. Some of the species roses are real climbers. They're vines, and they're huge. They can get to be massive, massive plants. I mean, they'll grow 40, 50, 60 feet into a tree.
What do you mean when you say species roses?
A rose that if you were hiking through the mountains of China, you would see a big rose cascading out of a tree. That's a wild rose. That's a species rose.
A species is a wild rose.
Yes,
yeah. Occurs in the wild. Okay.
Yeah. It hasn't been hybridized or anything. This is a lot. The climbers that we use in the garden, for the most part, are really, they're like hybrid teas, but with their stems on steroids. You can keep them as a shrub. Almost every climber you can keep as a shrub if you just cut it back regularly. or you can attach it to a structure and let it grow. It will not climb on its own. The climbing roses like this, they flower best on horizontal, growth coming off horizontal shoots. So, this we're going to climb it up over, and we'll get more flowering up top than we will on the sides. But if you're growing it at home and you have a fence or something, if you do horizontals and grow them almost like grapevines, where in the winter you trim it back to that horizontal, they'll flower off of that growth right there, and they'll flower phenomenally. If you've had roses and they haven't done well, you start doing that with them. Your climbing roses, it's amazing. Night and day difference to them and how they'll flower. But there's some roses that when you grow it as a climber, they give it one name. If you grow it as a shrub, they give it another name. So there really isn't a whole lot of difference in them.
With these structures, do they not get hot, so hot that it damages the plant or kills the plant? I don't know if it's a special coating or it just doesn't get that hot.
Well, when you get the plant growing around it really well, it shades the metal. I hope. I don't know. They haven't been out here in the middle of the summer yet.
I guess in general.
That usually isn't the problem. All right, one more right here, just to point out. I kind of mentioned this with the drift roses. This is a miniature rose. And these are roses that stay small, typically have little flowers. This one is Sweet Sunblaze, nice little pink guy. The nice thing about the miniatures is if you don't have as much space or you just have a container, they do really well in that kind of situation. And these, instead of going back down to just a handful of shoots, you really just trim back a little bit during the winter. All right. I think that's covered more or less everything here. There's some more roses in here that are wonderful, but it's kind of more of the same, I think. So, glad y'all could come out.
Well, thank you for staying and giving the tour to us.
But yeah,
Thank you very much, Mark.
my pleasure.
Thank you.